Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast, where we want you to thrive in the ministry God has called you to. We truly believe that God's placement has purpose, and we're here for you with encouragement and tools for the journey.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Olson. Thanks for joining us today. I'm so excited because I have two of our very best friends in with me today for a special interview. We have got some good things in store for you today. So I just, first of all, though, want to remind you about the Overflow Worship Conference coming up in October. If you don't know anything about it, you can learn about it on our website at overflowworship.com. Our guests today are going to be there in the flesh, in person, so you'll get to meet them. But right now I'm going to introduce them. Welcome, Paul and Brooke Vasilko.
Hey,
thank you, Andrea. We're excited to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
So why don't you let our listeners know a little bit about yourselves and where God has you right now?
I'm Brooke, and I was working for a music ministry, Carpenter Tools International, for many years. That's how I met Paul, my husband. Yeah. We have a heart for that ministry, but it's suspended operations this past year, and so I've been kind of figuring out what God has for me next. And that right now is natural health, really trying to support people going through chronic illness, as I've gone through that myself. And so, but I still have a heart for people and music and ministry, and love that I can do both, be in both worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm Paul, and I serve as a pastor at Refuge Church in Wilmer, which is where Overflow will be held, and the town, not the church. And Brooke, like Brooke said, we met through a music ministry. We both used to work in the administrative office at that ministry. So I was the program director, she was the office manager. But we both got to be really involved with music and things like that. And that's how we met, and that was kind of the heartbeat of our lives for a really long time. We're still very passionate about music, but our careers aren't in that anymore. But now, like I said, I serve as a pastor at a church, a local church. I'm just trying to figure out what God has for me there, what it looks like to be a pastor, going from parachurch to church ministry, and how I can be used that way and help our people grow closer to Christ and be people who worship God in spirit and in truth.
Yeah. I love that. You know, it's interesting just thinking through like some of the people that I know listen to this podcast and some of the people that I personally work with, and the word that comes up for a lot of people is transition. You know, like whether it's within the ministry, you know, there's just changes happening, or they're transitioning from one to another. What's one thing or two that you guys have done or implemented in your lives to help you walk through that transition? Is it, you know, maybe something between you or something personally that's really helped you as you've transitioned from one ministry to another? You know, Brooke, yours isn't in the church, but it's definitely a ministry to help people, you know, with natural health. And so I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been really blessed with, particularly because of just the way Brooke is wired, is just really good communication between the two of us, and she leads the effort in most of that. And so being really just honest and open about where we are with things, and being willing to ask questions of one another and where our hearts are. And like I said, I mean, Brooke's a lot better at that than I am. But two, just being, learning to be okay with things playing out on a different timeline than what maybe we were expecting. It's a whole long story, but I mean, my transition into pastoral ministry was something that, you know, we had been talking about for years before it actually happened. And there were opportunities where maybe we could have forced the issue, but we would have absolutely been running ahead of what God had planned. And it was really humbling and cool to see the way God protected us from that and didn't allow us to get ahead of him. And in many ways that he used some of the conversations that we had as a way to kind of put the brakes on things when they were going too fast or a different direction that we should have gone. So that was, I would just say, particularly if you're walking through transitions and you're married, that your spouse can be a huge tool for that. At least for me anyway.
Yeah. I don't know, looking back now at the transition, going really from full-fledged music ministry now into going to school for natural health, for me, I don't know, God was just so gracious to me. Like I'm normally someone that gets really anxious about like, what am I going to do? I need a plan. How am I going to get through this? Yeah, that's why we're friends. Yeah. But it was just so smooth, the transition for me. Like I still sometimes think, oh, I just wish I could be at, this point A. I still have a long ways to go. But when I look back at this whole transition that we've been going through, it has to be the Lord just giving me just grace to get through the transitions. And I've been excited. Like I've been ready to say goodbye to this season of our life in a way, and get excited about the next season, which probably a couple years ago, I would have never fathomed that could even be a possibility. So
yeah, I think it's really interesting for both of us that God really, really changed the desires of our hearts in many ways.
Wow. Yeah.
And in the Psalms that, God tells us if we delight in Him, then He'll give us the desires of our heart. And in many ways, I think for us, that has looked like Him kind of changing the desires of our hearts. Like, not that we're not so passionate about music and worship, we are, obviously, but to be in those positions where it was our career and kind of what everything was oriented around, God kind of changed both of our hearts in that regard. And to watch it happen and to be okay with that. Yeah. Like, to not think that we were giving up on something or, selling out or anything like that, but just to be like okay with the reality that maybe He's got a different path now for us. And I think in many regards, that was a turning point for us when we both kind of realized, oh, maybe our hearts are just not beating the same way for this like they used to. And that's okay. Maybe that's the Lord at work.
Yeah. And you guys were faithful in the waiting time, like faithful in the process of waiting for God to say, okay, go now.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a beautiful thing too. It just speaks to it speaks to your character and your sensitivity to Him and all of that. But also I think that it's an encouragement to hear those types of stories from someone who, maybe you don't feel like you're at the finish line, but you're on the other side of this, transition. You can look back and say, okay, I see what you did there, and being faithful in what was in front of you and not running ahead, not falling behind, but staying right there and, not despising the waiting.
Absolutely.
You guys didn't phone it in, just even in the waiting, like, well, I'm just going to chill and wait until I'm called to be a pastor or until, fill in the blank. And, then that's where like the roots go down and that's where the strength develops.
And I think one of the things too that was an interesting part of it is because as I was making that transition, physically, practically going through the process of candidating at a church and kind of unpacking the story of God leading me to that place, it was really fascinating, I think, and again, humbling and encouraging to look back and actually take stock and see, okay, God, how were you faithful in the waiting? Like, the very specific things, that opportunity, the door was closed on, or the door opened here, and now as I look back and reflect and see, wow, like this plan was playing out unbeknownst to me at the time, and now when I look back, so I think it's been helpful for me to actually stop and take stock and say, okay, God, how have you been faithful? And let me like look at it and see the tangible moments. This led to that, which led to this, which led to that. And that's pretty, again, humbling, but encouraging too to think about. So yeah, I would just say for anybody out there who is in a season of waiting, don't assume that means you're doing something wrong or that God's not at work. It is in those seasons of waiting sometimes that He's at His best work in your heart and in the heart of the people around you. So
yeah, I love that. Yeah, that is such an encouragement, I think, for all of us to hear, but, for people who are listening to just know that He's still working. He didn't forget, sometimes we feel like, do you see me here? Like, hello. Yeah, exactly.
That's how I felt at first when Paul said he wanted to be a pastor. Really? But the season of waiting, my hesitancy, I think, actually could have been used as part of
Absolutely.
God's timing too in the plan. So
it was 100% that way. Yeah.
And I'm 100% on board now, of course, but
just in case you were wondering.
Just in case.
Now that you're a year into
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, I would love to kind of shift gears a little bit, because you guys have a ton of experience in the practical side of training through Carpenters Tools International. So first of all, why don't you guys give our listeners just a little bit of a recap of what the program, how it functioned and existed, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah. Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, go for it.
So, Carpenters Tools International, CTI Music Ministries, basically the easiest way to explain it is they would bring together groups of musicians, young musicians, contemporary Christian musicians, so drummers, bassists, guitarists, keyboardists, vocalists, sound techs, and put them together in Wilmer, Minnesota in a band, train them for a few weeks, and then send them out to use music as a tool to share the gospel. And we had teams that would go internationally, and we had teams that would travel the domestic US and Canada and share more at churches and schools and things like that, versus the international teams would do more, outreach events, open air concerts and things like that. So our side of things, we both traveled as part of those teams in our various roles. I was a drummer, and Brooke was a vocalist and keyboardist and
pretty much anything.
Yeah.
Anything step in.
Yeah. I played bass on like 2 songs. They had to show me where to put my fingers on the fretboard, and I just memorized it. That is the definition of filling the need.
Yes. I'll take
filling the need.
Serve where you're asked to serve.
I had rhythm, but I had no melodic or harmonic or music theory backup. But hey, you know what? That's what we needed at the time. Then our role as we transitioned into the administrative side was that Brooke was the head vocal instructor and coach, and I would do various things when it came to training bands, mostly on the rhythm section and full band side of things.
Yeah. I mean, there would be groups of like 10 to 15, 16-year-olds to 30-year-olds that would come. They wouldn't know each other. We'd have them learn about 10, 15 songs. A lot of them were in different languages that... we go to Hong Kong, we would learn Cantonese, some worship songs and that. And so for 2 weeks, we would train them, their parts, how to work as a band, cultural things, taking time to have personal devotion time, team time, growing spiritually. So it was just this 2 intensive weeks of training these teams. And then they would go overseas. The summer programs would go overseas for a month, and then just kind of embed themselves in the culture and really share the gospel through music and drama. Yeah. So pretty cool opportunity to get to be a part of. Paul and I went to Singapore, and so that's when we got to first do ministry together there, which was awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the basis of what CTI has done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Such an amazing program, and just such great ministry. I loved, just because I have a personal connection with CTI and with you guys, it was so amazing to me to see as, CTI was kind of making that transition to closing a chapter. Yeah. And the posts on social media and, hey, if you've been in CTI, sound off, kind of comment, and just the hundreds of people who said, well, maybe they weren't sitting in a concert, they were actually on the team, and CTI changed their life. Yeah. Changing people's lives on both ends is just incredible. Yes. Just incredible.
Yes.
I mean, it absolutely changed our lives. I mean, really, and when I think about the story of God bringing me to where I am right now, and obviously God used that organization to help me meet my wife and settle in a foreign state to me, and and get hooked into a church that I'm now a pastor on. So it was hugely instrumental, and it's pretty cool to see God be using whatever He can, and using CTI Music Ministries for that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I love that. So you know, practically speaking, you guys had a really cool program for training your people and that you were sending out overseas. And so I would love to just pick your brain a little bit and maybe offer some tips and tools. A lot of, I mean, you guys know, you've been at the Overflow Worship Conference every single year. And so you know the questions that we get, and a lot of them come back to, like, how do I train people, or how do we run rehearsals well so that they're not frustrating for everybody. But they just don't know where to start. So let's start with like rehearsals, because you guys ran a lot of rehearsals. So you must have taught them, like, this is how we need to do it. So how did you guys approach rehearsals?
So one of the things that we always did before we would let them pick up their instruments is we laid the groundwork for how rehearsals were going to run for us. And one of the things we tried to do, I don't know if we always did a great job of it, but we tried to kind of say, like, it isn't that this way is the only way. It's just the way we're going to do it here. And so without trying to step on other people's toes and say, well, you know, the way they're doing it is wrong, we just try to say, it doesn't matter whether that way is right or wrong. It's just not the way we're going to do it here. And so that was helpful. It was like setting those ground rules. And a couple of those just really practical things were, if the trainer is talking, you're not playing. Like, just don't make them talk over you. Write everything down. Always have a pencil ready to write everything down. And, I think that was kind of a couple of the big ones.
I think you laid a groundwork of, this is the terminology we're going to use.
There you go.
Like, okay, when we say driving, okay, I want you to drive here. What does that mean musically? Like, what does that sound like? Giving them examples, or, having almost like a music workshop to start it off, so we can say, because the way that we would run rehearsals, or the way we would learn songs, our way, again, not the right way necessarily, just the way we did it, was to do it as close to the recording as we could. So, you know, do the harmonies as similar as you can, the tones, the structure, the roadmap. So we all kind of were on the same page to know this is our goal, you know, for what we are going to do. So that was helpful in, I think, probably laying foundation, common terminology.
Love that. Yeah, it's like giving people, you know, when I say this is what it means, and giving them kind of like a dictionary of of terminology for this organization. Like you said, it's not that this is exactly how it needs to be done, but it's a good way to, I mean, it's a good way to establish communication anywhere, even like in your marriage. Like, well, when I say this, it means this. I didn't mean that.
So we're still working on that.
We are too.
Perpetually.
Yes. So, I love that. I think that's so key to just establish that communication and terminology and just a general understanding of, like, respecting each other, respecting the as you called the trainer. So in this case, the worship leader or whomever is running the rehearsal. That's a big thing that we have always tried to do too, is establish that respect of the work that the worship leader has done, you know, to put in, and, you know, mapping out songs and that kind of thing. And so that's a huge thing that I think is helpful for people to understand as well.
I think just preparation of the leader and the team members is essential. I mean, in our case, we had 2 weeks to learn everything and memorized, and, you know, and it was, and we didn't do music the whole
day
time, you know, it was only a couple hours a day, probably, really, at the end of the day. And so really being prepared, as, you know, so I was a vocal instructor, so I would spend hours beforehand going through, knowing exactly where I wanted people to sing harmony, just being prepared, so that hour that we had a day to just learn our parts, I was prepared. I knew, you know, we weren't trying to figure it out on the spot. It was already planned and prepared, and same for all the other instruments. Again, that's not normal to have an hour just for vocals on worship team rehearsal, you know,
but
and
in
then
your context,
but in the context, that's what we were given. But that, I think, that preparedness of team members and leader is just essential to have a really effective rehearsal time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too that I would just say as a general tip or thing that we found helpful was just being really clear on what you're expecting people to walk into rehearsal, like how you're expecting them to walk into rehearsal, what preparedness level.
Yeah.
You know, for us, when we would be working with these team members, keep in mind, they're coming from literally around the country, sometimes around the world. And so we were working with them for months leading up to that. And so we would send out recordings to them, you know, a month in advance. And then we would send out really detailed instructions. Again, this is not going to work for everybody. You know, if you're a worship leader who has another full-time job, you know, you can't do this. This was our full-time job. But we'd send out like basically a sheet outlining, okay, if you're a drummer, listen for this, 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 and this. And if you're a vocalist, listen for this, this, this. And so then when they came, we could kind of hold them to that. You know, we could have that basis already laid. It didn't always work, and that's fine. But I would just say communicating clearly what your expectations are for preparedness coming into it, you know. Especially if you're a worship leader, you know, maybe you're getting frustrated at every rehearsal because nobody knows the music, but have you actually told them, like, no, I expect when you show up that you will have listened to the music or whatever.
Yeah, that's so good because everybody has different expectations. Like every person is different, every personality is different. And so, yeah, that's good just to communicate, you know, this is what I would expect when I say this, you know, this is what I would expect coming in. And that right there will maybe diffuse some frustration right off the bat.
Right. No, that's good. That's good. Another thing I thought of, and maybe it bleeds into all areas of leading, I guess, or just the team unity, is like developing relationships and rapport and love and compassion for each other as a team members really helps you limit the distractions and the frustrations when you're leading then as a team, you know, at your church or wherever. And we saw that play out. I mean, we spent 2 weeks with our team members having meals, you know, doing corporate worship together. I mean, we kind of, that's again, not in real world settings necessarily, but
you got to see the effects of that.
We
so
got
tell
to
us
see,
about that. That's so cool.
It was so cool to be, develop these relationships with these team members. And if I just would have been just the hour of, you know, the time where I taught them their vocal parts, I would have missed out on so much more of knowing who are they as a person? What do they enjoy? What are their frustrations? You know, what does their heart for God look like? And so because we had that opportunity to spend 2 weeks, day in, day out, 8 in the morning till 9 at night with these, I call them kids. They're only like a few years younger than me. Still my kids. Yeah. But because of that, that gave me more grace for them. It gave me more understanding. It actually helped me figure out, okay, you know what? This person maybe can't handle as much, you know, difficulty learning some harmony parts. So I'm just going to adjust it. So they'll feel successful rather than being frustrated. And what I found is when you build that rapport and you build that community with each other, and you really do talk about, if you can talk about like where you are with your relationship with the Lord, what are you learning? What's hard? That will open up so much more compassion for each other. So, you know, I've been there. You've probably been there too, where you're prepping to go to rehearsal for worship team, and you're maybe dreading that one person because they're not prepared, or they're not like, they can't seem to get the click, or you know, they always sing too loud or something. But you get to know them and you talk to them beforehand, and you realize they're just going through a really hard season right now, or you realize there's so much more to the story that they've been trying so hard and they're practicing, they just can't get it. That ability to have compassion for that person just grows, and you're able then to, maybe when you're leading other people, you're not distracted by the frustration of, oh, I'm so irritated with that person, that you lose all focus on where your attention should be anyways. And our goal as worship leaders, as worship team, you know, is to usher people into the presence of God. And so if anything is distracting us from that, that's why I just think like being in community, knowing the person, asking people on your team throughout the week, how are you doing? How can I pray for you? Like when you get to know someone, and that's just in life in general too, right? Totally. It doesn't even apply. It can apply to anything in life. You get to know someone, you have more grace and compassion. And I just think it's really cool we got to witness that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a whole new depth of the compassion when you are
Yes.
in relationship
Yes.
with them. And that brings me to another question, something that we hear a lot, and you guys have heard it too in your experience, is just the whole relationship dynamic in the team. And even just how do we promote team unity and not this team competition, especially when you're working with younger people and that kind of feel to, well, she gets to lead out on this song and I don't get to lead out on this song. And obviously we know that, those types of things, we don't want to dwell in those attitudes. However, we still do have to deal with them sometimes.
Right.
So you guys, always working with varying ages, but mostly under 30 and a lot of like young 20s to high teens. Yeah. How did you guys promote that, or did it just go away with the unity community factor?
Yeah.
So this is like this is something I'm pretty passionate about, because though like I was the program director of this music ministry and I do love music, like it's not like, I'm not like desperate. I'm not one of these guys that's like desperate to jam every day and like, can't get enough of playing music. I love it, and when I'm playing with good people and having experiences, it's a lot of fun. But so it's a little bit easier for me to step away from that. But the reality is, like, when you're working with, particularly with musicians, it seems like because God has wired musicians a very particular way, it's so central to who they are, and that's a good thing. Like God's wired us that way. He's put that in us, his creative genius in us, and so you can't view it as a bad thing. But how do we allow God to use that and not allow it to be co-opted for selfish motivations? So how that works for a lot of musicians is, on the selfish side of things, it's, when I play really well, people like it, and so then I get acclaim and applause, and so then all of a sudden it becomes this identity thing where I'm not just Paul, I'm the drummer that got on stage in front of all those people and did that thing. Versus focusing really in, and so one of the things we really try to hammer home is the whole identity thing, and that our identity is not as a guitar player or a worship leader. Our identity as sons and daughters of God. And that's because of Jesus. We are adopted into the family. And so no matter how good we are or how bad we are, that doesn't affect our relationship with God. When God looks at us, he sees his son Jesus, and that's what defines us. And so if we can help our people understand that, then suddenly it doesn't matter if I have that solo or not, because I'm a son of God, or I'm a daughter of God, and so that's what defines me. So if he gives me that opportunity, I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to have fun doing it, and it's going to be a great thing. But I think just that identity piece, and something too, like just as a drummer, speaking practically, drummers have a bad reputation at times. There's all the drummer jokes. What do you call the guy that hangs out with all the musicians? The drummer. I mean, I've heard them all, and some of them are accurate. But I think one of the things that drummers often get knocked for is that they're not prepared. And I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of drummers just like to play, and they don't want to actually show up to worship team for maybe the right reasons. Sometimes it's not always the case by far, but in some instances it's like, I just want to show up to play because I like to play drums, and this is an opportunity that I get to play. And so really kind of just checking that motivation of, why am I doing this? Do I want to do this because I want to lead worship, or do I want to do this because I like to play drums? So so the motivation piece, the identity piece, those were huge for us as we tried to work with.
A phrase we always said was, we are servants first and musicians second. Like that's who we are. That's what our goal is. Music is just a tool for us to be a vehicle of really sharing the love of Christ with people. So serving, that's our identity too.
I love that. Something that I say to young people that I work with is, we can't lead well if we can't serve and support well. We have to be able to step back and support well and champion other people's well. That's the mark of a good leader. Absolutely. And I love that. So I think that's that's such a great place for us to wrap up our discussion, just that we would all find our identity in the Lord and in who we are in Christ. And, let that be our first foundation, our first stop, our first focus, and everything else will kind of fall into alignment from there when we put that at the forefront. So thank you both for sharing your hearts.
Thanks for having us.
Spending your time
here. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for all of you out there listening, thanks for joining us today. We hope that you are encouraged and you feel empowered to go on your way. And we just are passionate about people thriving in their ministry. So we pray for you, and we pray that you feel encouraged from this conversation today.
Thank you for listening to the Overflow Worship Podcast. To stay up to date, please subscribe for the latest episodes and information. To learn more about the ministry of Overflow, visit overflowworship.com. If you have questions or prayer requests, we would love to hear from you. You can reach us at info@overflowworship.com.